The lies and the deception, the public deception, began from day one. Fear that was generated was hyped and was used and manipulated by corporate interests in the background. There's a whole barrage of medical doctors in Ireland who've essentially been cancelled by the mainstream media. It can't be the case that the 170 TDs in the Dáil are all fundamentally corrupt. Ask questions about why we have no COVID inquiry, why we have no compensation scheme for the vaccine injured, why RTE seems utterly unaccountable for the corruption that's gone on there. Don't feel bad that you took the vaccine. There's somebody to blame because you were forced to take a vaccine, and that's the Irish government and the regulator. And the regulator failed people, and certainly I'll be there on June 10th, you'll be there on June 10th, and so if people want to protest about the regulator and having had to take the vaccine, come along and join us.
Hi everyone, Elaine Mullally here, and I'm very, very, very excited and delighted to welcome Dr. Marcus de Brun on my podcast today. So before I start speaking to Marcus or ask him his first question, I'd like to give a little bit of a background as to Dr. de Brun's medical career and his education, etc. So Dr. Marcus de Brun, whose titles include GP, microbiologist and philosopher, Dr. de Brun ran his own family practice in Rush, County Dublin since 2010. He's a graduate of Trinity College with a BA in microbiology. He's a member of the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland and in the Royal New Zealand College of General Practice. He holds a degree in microbiology from TCD. He has a degree in English and Science in the CSU Sacramento, California. He holds an undergraduate in philosophy from Birkbeck College, University of London. In 2018, he was appointed to the Irish Medical Council by the then Minister for Health, Simon Harris. And with all this education and experience, Dr. de Brun, you're very, very welcome onto my podcast.
Thanks very much, Elaine. I'm sitting in the car, so apologies to our viewers or listeners who see me in the car. Unfortunately, I work in the out of hours and we got delayed this evening, so I couldn't make it home in time. So I'm parked in a nice shady spot. And thank you for reminding me of all my qualifications. A lot of people are probably wondering, sure, that lad can't know anything. He spent so much time going to school and learning. How does he know anything about the real world at all? But anyway, yes, it was education has been a long journey for me, shall we say, and amazingly brought me to the point where I suppose I'm now at the threshold of actually losing my license now. So I've gone from hero to zero in the eyes of my profession, unfortunately.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but you did mention there that you're appointed to the Irish Medical Council in 2018 by Simon Harris. Could you explain to us what exactly is the role of the Irish Medical Council and what your position within that Medical Council was?
Well, I mean, most people are familiar with the Medical Council in terms of that it's the body, a state body, supposedly independent, but established by the state and answerable to the minister for the protection of the public against, I suppose, incompetence or malpractice within the medical profession. So most people would presume that if something bad happened to them at the hands of a medical practitioner, or a medical practitioner was doing something wrong, that the place where they go and they bring that complaint is to the Medical Council. So the Medical Council is essentially the regulator of the medical profession. That's what they do, and they have. They're supposed to be independent in terms of their views. Their primary concern is supposed to be patient safety and the general public as such. Yeah, I was elected to the Medical Council. A lot of doctors have a number of little difficulties with the Medical Council, so I was elected onto the council in 2018 with the hope of just exercising a bit of reform and a bit of change into kind of how doctors are dealt with by the Medical Council. And that, I suppose, I was on it for a couple of years, and then I felt compelled to resign during the nursing home debacle because of what I was seeing in the nursing home, and because of what was happening in the Medical Council in response to what was going on in Irish society in the early days of the pandemic, and then what I noticed got progressively worse in terms of, I suppose, what some researchers and writers have referred to as a thing is called regulatory capture, when the institutions who are supposed to be regulating medicine or regulating on behalf of the public actually start to operate in the service of corporations, pharmaceuticals, or the government itself, and that's precisely what happened to the medical council. So yes, so I resigned from the medical council, and unfortunately, my resignation didn't go down too well. The medical council were not happy with me resigning, and I suppose I should have kind of smelled a rat at the start, because when I did resign, I wrote a letter to the then president of the medical council and to the council explaining that I was resigning because of the systemic failures in the nursing home sector, the abuse of patients that was going on, the horrific deaths that were happening. I pointed all of these out, all of my concerns out in the body of a resignation letter, but shortly after I resigned, the medical council issued a press statement saying I'd resigned for personal reasons, almost suggesting that perhaps I was sick or I was ill or something like that. So the lies and the deception, the public deception, began from day one, and they've continued, and they've ultimately culminated now in my having to present before a fitness-to-practise hearing, where I have to essentially, I suppose, fight, for want of a better word, for my right to continue to work as a physician. So that's where we're at the minute,
And when is that hearing?
Well, they've given me a date for June, for the 10th of June. But you see, I suppose, there is a little bit of, the mainstream media are not interested in people like me or people who've been trying to object, like the late Dr. Martin Feely and Pat Morrissey and Dr. William Ralph and Dr. Jerry Waters. And I could go on. There's a whole barrage of medical doctors in Ireland who've essentially been cancelled by the mainstream media. But having said all of that, this case, that's my case, because I resigned from the council, it is going to receive a smidgen of mainstream media attention. So if the medical council, I suppose, gets a whiff or a suspicion, which they may very well get a hint that there might be some degree of support or people showing up to show some support for me or for what I've been saying, they may petition the government they can petition the courts, should I say, or they can apply to have my case held in camera or held in secret. Now, that's a facility. Mary Harney made the Medical Practitioners Act in 2007, and part of that act was that all cases against doctors should be held in the public domain. But there's a caveat to that. If it's a case that things need to be kept secret because of the sensitive nature of a complaint or because of a doctor's health or something like that, the Medical Council has the option to hold the case in secret. So I have a sneaking suspicion that that's what they might do, that's what might happen in my case. But again, I don't know. So 10th of June is the tentative date that they've set for my hearing, but I expect that to change.
And what is the potential outcome? I've read some of your tweets, and you've said that you're pleading guilty to the charge. So what do you mean by you're pleading guilty, and what will it mean for you if you're found guilty?
It's not entirely true. I'm not pleading guilty. I am guilty, most certainly, of what I'm being charged of. That's for sure. I have nothing. I am guilty of believing that the medical council is in the service of both the minister and the pharmaceutical industries and has no interest in public safety or public health, and I have good reason to believe that. I am entirely guilty of believing that the COVID vaccine currently available is dangerous and it should be removed from use, or at the very least its use should be restricted to very, very vulnerable high-risk patients, most of which are still residing in the nursing homes. So I'm guilty, and that's essentially the basis of the medical council's case against me, that I have publicly criticized the vaccine, publicly criticized NEFIT policy, and in doing so, I've seriously undermined, apparently, faith in the medical profession, and as such, I'm guilty of serious misconduct. So, I don't know. I don't intend to plead when I get to the medical council, because I really don't have any respect for what they're doing and what they've done to Irish people, and what's going on. So I mean, I suppose I agree with them in that sense that I am indeed quite guilty. What they could do, what they intend to do, I don't know. They could remove my license. They've done that already. They did it to Jerry Waters, a very decent and well-loved GP, loved by all of his patients and respected by all of his colleagues up until he refused to administer the COVID vaccine and refused to refer for PCR testing, which at the outset I had a degree of faith in. I thought maybe there was something to it, maybe it was picking up something, but very quickly on learned that the PCR test was an absolute farce. It was detecting people who'd walk past somebody with COVID on the street. It was an absolute ludicrous. It was merely just feeding the RTE numbers that they were on the television saying every night. So Jerry refused to refer for testing, refused to administer the COVID vaccine, and he was suspended. So and the medical council went after, were very vicious and very thorough in their dealing with him, because he was one of the first doctors to stand up against the medical council, and so he got suspended. So I mean, I don't know if they're going to do the same with me. I've been trying to avoid. I mean, I've a family to raise, so I have a job that I have to try and keep. So I've been trying to avoid suspension from the very beginning, because they wrote to me. I mean, I attended a public rally in 2020, and the medical council wrote to me and said, they warned me that that I had a duty to, that they were very unhappy that I'd attended a public rally, that I'd violated the code of ethics by speaking against public health guidelines, that I had apparently from the president of the then president of the medical council informed me that I had a duty to promote all public health guidelines. Now, at my practice, in order to avoid getting suspended, I followed all public health guidelines. So we wore masks, we social distanced, we did everything that we were supposed to do. So they couldn't get me in that. The only thing that they had that was driving them nuts was the fact that I was speaking out against lockdown. I was speaking out against masks, and speaking out against the nursing homes and what was happening, because none of it was making any sense. I mean, you remember the ridiculous going into a pub and you could not wear a mask if you spent a $5, and you had to wear a mask if you bought a pint, and all these COVID passports, all of that madness. Well, myself and not just me, many GPs were speaking out, but we were all getting letters from the medical council warning us that we were guilty of serious misconduct for failing to promote the COVID guidelines. So anyway, I mean, when I went to that protest in 2020, I suppose to back up a little bit, the medical council waits and is supposed to be in the interest of the general public. So they operate on the basis of complaints. So they need a complaint before they can kind of put a doctor under investigation and under the aegis of investigating a complaint. So when I went to that protest in 2020, the medical council wrote to me and said, somebody at the protest has contacted us and said that you may not have used hand sanitizer after you were shaking hands with people at the protest. Therefore, we're placing you under investigation. So that was the trigger for them. Now, when I got that letter, I knew then that was complete confirmation for me. Okay, this is completely rotten, because I had sent in complaints to the medical council about people dying in the nursing homes. My patients had sent in complaints to the medical council about what was happening. Other doctors had sent in complaints about people dying as a consequence of lockdown policies. None of those complaints that dealt with the death of Irish citizens, that dealt with suffering, none of those complaints, and there were complaints made against Varadkar because, as you know, he rejoined the medical register, and he was out at halting sites testing travellers during the pandemic in a big show of PR or stuff. So he was on the medical register, and he was subject to complaints, and there were numerous complaints made about him and his second wave, and about Holohan, and about shutting down the health service, and all of that. But all of those complaints from patients and from doctors, they were all suppressed. And I was getting investigated for potentially not using hand sanitizer at a public rally. So the purpose of the investigation wasn't essentially to find out did I use hand sanitizer or not. It was simply to lock me under an investigation. Because once they have you under an investigation, the medical council, the rules are quite clear. Once you're under investigation by the medical council, if you don't cooperate with the investigation, you can be immediately suspended as a consequence of not cooperating. So for 5 years, I've been back and forth with the medical council. They've been essentially monitoring my tweets, monitoring my writings. So over the years, they've collected together anything that I've tweeted and anything that I've published. I write for a socialist online magazine called Cassandra Voices, lefty socialist magazine that has art stuff in it, and that has Poet of the Week and Artist of the Week. But anyway, I write for that online magazine, and I published a number of articles in it. And one of the articles I published in it was why I believe that COVID vaccines aren't safe, and I outlined my criticism of the vaccine in that article. So the council basically took everything that I wrote, and they said, we're going to send it to an independent expert for review, So this is why it dragged on for years. So I got a copy back then of this independent professor in Cork who came to the conclusion that, yes, he read all of my tweets and read all of my writings, and he disagreed with a lot of what I said. And interestingly, he agreed with a lot of what I said about what happened in the nursing home. So I got this report from the council, and I said, well, there's nothing in here about serious misconduct. I said, in order to proceed to a fitness-to-practice hearing, the rules of the game are you have to have some charge of serious misconduct. So they said, they wrote back to me and they said, well, we'll get the professor to write a second report. So they went back to him and got him to write another report, which again, he pointed out, took some tweets and some quotations from the articles that I published. And he said, yes, I disagree with all of these, and these are all wrong, in his opinion. And still there was no mention of serious misconduct. And people are going to honestly think I'm making this up, But I wrote to them again, and I said, well, look, you're still proceeding to fitness to practice here. You've got, where's the serious misconduct? Because it's not mentioned in this Professor Bradley's report. And they said, well, look, we'll get him to write a third report. It's a comedy of errors. So they got him to write a third and final report. Interestingly enough, in his third report, he picked out a tweet that I wrote in 2021, and the tweet was along the lines of, I felt at the time that the money being paid to me at the time as a GP and to my colleagues was a form of bribery, because we were being paid huge amounts of money in terms of €40 to answer the telephone, €70 if somebody had a respiratory symptom and they came into the surgery. And all of this was unvouched. You just gave the government a nice list of how many times you answered the phone and said COVID. So there was a huge transfer of money from the state to the GPs in order to go along with this. And I put up a tweet, and the words I said in the tweet were along the lines of, the medical profession has effectively been bribed with the payments that were made during COVID. Now, interestingly, in the final report that's copper fastened to my serious misconduct, the Professor Bradley said that this tweet, where I'm accusing GPs of being bribed, which I didn't, I said effectively bribed, but this tweet where I'm accusing my colleagues of being bribed undermines faith in the medical profession, denigrates my colleagues, and is therefore tantamount or amounts to serious misconduct. Now, I think most people who hear that, surely can recognize that there's something rotten going on here, seriously rotten. I mean, there's no smoking gun, there's no patient, there's nobody hurt, there's no harm done. And yet, this is what I'm enduring. No. I'm not alone in going through this. Other colleagues are going through precisely the same thing. I'm not going through the same. There are several GPs going through the exact same process for similar rubbish, But if we put it in perspective, they're pursuing me on this basis, and yet the deaths, the suffering, the shutting down of the health service, decisions that Varadkar and Holohan made, the regulator for those decisions, the regulator for those people is the medical council. And yet all of their mistakes, if you want to call them that, or crimes, if you want to call them that, are completely and utterly ignored by the regulator. So something rotten is going on, and I'm convinced what's going on is this phenomenon that's referred to as regulatory capture by both the pharmaceutical industry and the minister himself.
Yeah, I mean, one of my questions was in relation to why more GPs didn't step forward, because I know, I would know quite a few of the ones who did, But you've just clarified the answer because they were getting paid, they were getting incentives to go along with the charade. Basically, is what happened. And I mean, a lot of people, lay people like myself, like we questioned, why are they going along with it? But if they were getting paid for phone calls and paid for this, and like you say, unvouched, well, there's a serious incentive there.
Look, absolutely. Of course, there's questions to be asked. And look, far be it from me to say that the vast majority of my colleagues are all corrupt, and it's just me and the few guys at before the medical council who are not. I mean, I certainly don't want to come across as saying that. Then president of the medical council, Dr. Rita Doyle, sent out multiple circulatories to GPs all around the country and warned us that we were duty bound to promote. Now, this is the first time anyone ever encountered the word promote guidelines. Certainly follow guidelines. But she sent a circular around to everybody informing us that we were duty bound to promote the guidelines and there would be consequence if we didn't. Now, it's a very subtle little use of the word promote. But basically, any criticism of the vaccine or any criticism of policy is clearly not promoting the guidelines. So a message was sent. Doctors have families too, and mortgages to pay, and it's a very, very difficult thing to particularly in the midst of what was going on and the scaremongering, to actually stand up. I have lots of colleagues who email me in support, who don't want to be named, who say, I'm disgusted with what's going on, and there's nothing they can do. We're all subject to the medical council. That is the governing body, and if the medical council wants to immediately suspend you and take away your license, they can do it on a whim. They can do it within 24 hours. They can do it.
I was just going to say, I don't want to kind of brand everybody who didn't speak out as less courageous, but they were. Like, it's not like it's the likes of you, and as you say, Dr. Billy Ralph, Dr. Pat Morrissey, Dr. Jerry Waters, Dr. Michael McConville. Like, you guys did it even though you have families, and have outgoings and have mortgages and have, so like, if more GPs had have stepped forward at that time, then this would have been over. That's my belief. And I know, I understand the fear of losing your livelihood and the fear of losing everything you've built up, but I can't help but feel I'm not a GP. Again, I'm going back to layman's terms. The principle of do no harm, like, that's the cornerstone of medical ethics, and it's understood among all GPs that, everything you do, you've a duty to avoid causing harm to your patients and to act in their best interest, right? That's a universal kind of known phenomenon, or not phenomenon, but it's known within your industry. And like, all of my life, I trusted my GP. My GP was the person that I brought my babies to when they were sick. My GP was the person that I trusted, completely with my health and with my children's health. And for that trust to have completely been turned on its head at a time when people, particularly elderly people, vulnerable people, and young people, for a perfectly healthy child, teenager, middle-aged person to be subjected to what is now, we know, it was a medical experiment. Perfectly healthy people to be put at risk for no reason. We know it didn't turn out to be a killer disease. People can't even say at the time, well, we didn't know at the time it wasn't. The evidence was there in 2020. There was a surge of excess deaths in April of 2020 because a decision was made to move, more than I do, to move very sick people out of hospitals into nursing homes. And a lot of those people died in horrible, inhumane conditions, and I'm not blaming the staff. I'm saying because their families weren't with them, they weren't allowed to be present when they were leaving this world, and I think it was horrific what happened. That was all done in the name of ethics and to protect, to do no harm. There was a serious amount of harm done to families, to older people, to younger people. And it just would have taken probably 5% of the GPs in this country to say, this is not right, we are not doing this. And you are one of those people who did that, and a handful of others. And I think it's outrageous that you're going to pay a price, or possibly going to pay a price. Or, I mean, try and explain to us what your personal life has been like over the last 5 years.
Oh, I mean, certainly, look, I suppose, you know, I like to consider myself as a human person and as a human GP, and I never like to come across to my patients as being any different to them in the sense that I'm a human being and I have a little bit of knowledge and we make a contract and we work together to help them get better, you know. So I don't like this notion of doctors being human or being inhuman and holier than thou and being superior or anything like that, because it doesn't work. People don't buy that shit. People like to know they can trust you, and to trust you they have to feel that you're a human being too, and you have to be vulnerable. But I don't like being a human being and being vulnerable, and particularly don't like being a human being and being vulnerable on air or talking. So yeah, I mean, look, I suppose it was a very, very difficult time. It was very difficult for my wife. You know, my wife is an immigrant, and she's not white, and so she always has. She's been in Ireland for 20 odd years, but she's always felt a little bit excluded in the community. You know, or I suppose that's the word excluded is perhaps a little bit too strong. But she's always been conscious of her ethnic difference. You know, and certainly, you know, in the early stages of COVID, you know, I was labelled as being far right, as being some kind of an anti-immigrant extremist, and all of this sort of bizarre kind of rubbish when, you know, RTE were trying to cancel me, and the Irish Times were trying to cancel me. But that kind of stuff, it was a heavy toll on my family, on my marriage, and it made a very, very difficult time for me, you know, but you know, we got through it. We're still together. We're still in love. We're still happy. We have our kids and our family. But there's absolutely, it was one of the most difficult times of my life, and difficult times in terms of my marriage. I mean, my wife would be going to the school, and you know, people would be kind of saying, "That's the woman who's married to the, you know, anti-vax doctor," you know. You know, and people would like not send their kids down to play with my kids because I was the anti-vax doctor, you know, and that was very hurtful to my wife, as it was to me too. So, you know, they were difficult times, but I don't like talking about how hard it's been for me, because it's you know, people died. I mean, I had a patient who I referred for a colonoscopy, you know, in the early stages of the pandemic, and because the system was shut down, he didn't get his colonoscopy, and he didn't get his colonoscopy for nearly a year. And when he did get his colonoscopy, when the system finally cranked back up again and had to trudge through the massive amount of waiting list, he had extensive bowel cancer spread all over his body, and you know, that's horrible stuff. That makes my little bit of whinging, you know, sound ridiculous almost. You know, people in Ireland died and suffered. There were a huge increase in suicide, a huge increase in depression. Horrible things went on during the pandemic. And I tell you, what did it for me, the kick in the stomach for me was the minister who was responsible for the worst of it, Simon Harris. He was promoted to Taoiseach and is now the Taoiseach. And, you know, most other countries in the world have both a COVID inquiry and a vaccine compensation scheme. We've neither. And the reason we have neither is because it's almost like, I mean, I don't like to imagine that we're living in a totalitarian state and there's freedom of speech is gone and all of this. But when you do look at how decent doctors like Martin Feely, like Billy Ralph, like Pat Marr, the list, there's plenty of good, decent doctors. When they're all cancelled by RTE and cancelled by the mainstream media, and all of us are all labelled as being some kind of far-right extremist, you really do. And then you see the person, the minister. I mean, I'm not saying that Simon Harris, you know, did anything wrong. I believe he did, and I believe that he made some terrible, terrible mistakes, and I believe he listened to some terrible, terrible advice that was being motivated by pharmaceutical industry and by corporations. And I think there was a lot of rot that went on during COVID. That's just my opinion. But at the very least, that man should be before a tribunal answering some questions. And that's all I'm saying. Just answer some questions. But not only is there absolutely zero accountability, okay, that's one thing. Maybe Brun and all of his friends are nutcases, and maybe Harris is a pillar of the community and is absolutely faultless. But absolutely absolutely no question of accountability. And on top of that, shortly, within a couple of years, the man is promoted to the highest office of the land. I mean, it's almost like a message to people like me, to people like you, to normal, average people. Shut up, put up, and if you don't, we're going to come after you and we're going to get you. And sadly, I feel that that's what's happening. And sadly, I feel that this medical council fitness-to-practice hearing is really just the end stage of that process. Put up, shut up, and you're going to get it for opening your mouth, you know. And that does equate ultimately with a kind of a totalitarian reality that, I don't know, I can't get my head around, but it does seem to be the reality of the day, you know, which is, you know, and I think that's probably why we see so many people out on the streets and there's so much anger in Irish society, because people are not stupid. People know that Harris was the Minister for Health when people were dying. They know these things. And then RTE does a right job on saying anybody who gets out on the street now is either homophobe or is far-right lunatic or is anti-immigrant. You know, all anger in Ireland is controlled, it seems, by the mainstream media, and it's labelled and pigeonholed, just as I was. I was labelled as a racist, far-right Nazi, anti-vaxxer. I mean, I've given every single vaccine available in the state for 20 years as a physician, and I never had any problems with the childhood immunization scheme. Never. There's no grounds whatsoever to call me an anti-vaxxer, but apparently that's what I was, and apparently, you know, according to the mainstream media or RT, that's what I still am, you know, which is, you know, how do you get out of that?
It's all they had. It's all they had to discredit people. I mean, you know, I read out your list of credentials at the start of this podcast, and but like you had the likes of Professor Luke O'Neill sitting down. He's now gone into climate. Like, it just goes to show you these experts. They rolled them out as experts. They weren't experts. They were rolled out by RTE as the ones who were authority on everything. It was a fiasco. It was. And people believed it because once you can instill fear in enough people, then they'll go with anything. And I mean, the whole thing was as well, you know, we started off saving Granny, social distances, don't call to her, don't visit her, don't do anything. And then it was get this injection to save Granny. But you weren't supposed to be calling to her in the first place. But now you can call to her if you get this vaccine. And you can go back to work, by the way, if you take this vaccine. There was so many people took it for travel, to sit inside and have a pint, to go back to life as normal, to go back to work, a lot of people. Like, I'd say if I have spoken to 3 people who said to me, I got it because I really, really wanted to take this because I thought it would prevent me. Everyone knew it wasn't going to prevent what they were selling it as preventing getting COVID-19, because it went from being safe and effective, 100% effective, to being 90% effective, to being 80% effective, to being 60, 50, 40. And then it was like, oh no, we never said it would work. We never said it would work. We just said, you know, it would prevent you going to hospital. Oh no, we didn't say it would prevent you going to hospital. We said it would prevent you from dying. It's like they kept changing the goalposts every single time.
That's true. Yeah. Well, you know, it was very. I mean, the manufacturers of the COVID vaccine, I've no doubt that they exerted a huge degree of influence over political figures, and they have a huge amount. Corporations, corporate power, I think, in the Western world is the real center of power, and people like Simon Harris, they're benign sorts of puppets that kind of surf the wave of public opinion, but generally they do precisely what they're expected to do. But you know, it was very, very interesting during COVID. Interesting now, but painful back then. But it was very, very interesting to watch how the vaccine agenda was actually pushed through onto the Irish people. Like, you take something like hydroxychloroquine, which I never prescribed. I think I wrote a prescription for it once for somebody who was already on it, and someone else took their tablets. You know, and it's not that I was avoiding prescribing it. I suppose I had a different approach to COVID, where I was prescribing anti-inflammatories and inhaled corticosteroids, and they seemed to me to be working. But anyway, my point being there was a lot of debate and discussion as to whether hydroxychloroquine was of any benefit. Now, hydroxychloroquine is a drug that we use for arthritics. In many countries, it's over the counter. It's a relatively benign sort of anti-inflammatory, and certainly if it's taken with medical supervision, it's not going to cause anybody any harm. So why is it that I'm in the nursing home and patients are dying, or there's elderly people dying at home and in the community of flu mix between COVID or whatever? And why is it that absolutely no treatment modality was allowed by the Irish College of General Practitioners and by the Medical Council of Ireland? Why is it that anybody who tried to prescribe hydroxychloroquine was attacked and was put under investigation and ultimately faces, like Pat Morrissey, for example, he's currently going through disciplinary proceedings on the basis that he used hydroxychloroquine to treat people who were sick and some of who could have died, and he had very good results. As a doctor, if you came to me, for example, with a cough, and I determined, sometimes as in the history of medicine, I can prescribe you a drug that I think might be of benefit because of my medical knowledge, my understanding of. For example, if you had a cough and you told me you had indigestion as well or reflux, I might treat your cough with an anti-reflux tablet, or a thing called a PPI, a drug called Losec or something. And what the thinking there is, and lots of doctors do it, the thinking is that at night you could be getting a bit of reflux coming up the back of your throat and it's going down onto your chest and it's causing you to cough in the morning. So if I treat the reflux with a PPI, I'm going to get rid of your cough. Now, nowhere in the manual of drugs does it say a PPI or an indigestion tablet can be used to treat cough. It's the doctor will make that decision and in partnership with you and say, listen, I think you have a bit of reflux. We can try this and see. And that's an old established precedent for doctors to use that we can use, and that's called off-license use. So you've got the license for the PPI is for indigestion, but a doctor can use it in other circumstances, like, as I say, cough, That established precedent that exists among every single doctor in Ireland and has been in existence since in the history of medicine. It's almost, in many respects, it's how medicine evolves in many respects. That established precedent of trying to treat people with empirical knowledge or applying a drug, that was quashed during COVID. And we were told, absolutely, you are not allowed to use any medication to treat COVID. Now, that's bizarre. That is a bizarre development in the history of human medicine, that doctors are being told not to treat. And you have to ask why. And there's a specific reason why. And the reason is because the manufacturers of the vaccine got the vaccine onto the market under EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. And one of the conditions of emergency use authorization is there has to be no other treatment available. That's how the vaccine got through and got onto the grand scale use that it currently occupies, was emergency use authorization. And the condition for that is that no other medicine. So that's the reason the medical council were policing doctors and telling them, don't try and help you. I mean, can you imagine the bizarre situation where we as doctors are being told by our regulatory body who's supposed to be looking after the health of our patients not to treat them, to let them die? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the actual reality, the space where we occupy. And the reason was specific. The reason was for a vaccine. And people like Luke O'Neill, he did that dramatic U-turn on television where he was saying, we didn't need masks and they were useless. And then he turned around and said, oh, no, of course everybody needs to wear a mask. It all kind of changed. And, the thinking there was get people into the masks, because if you get them into the masks, the only way you'll ever get them out of it, or the only way they'll ever get out of it, is when they're vaccinated. The whole pandemic, as far as I could see, was being manipulated and orchestrated, not in the interests of public health or doctors helping patients, but in the interests of corporations, and the medical council and the minister were the tools to exercise that degree of control over people. And I know that sounds like a horrible conspiracy and everything, but look, I'm sorry if it sounds like a conspiracy, because that's the reality that I went through. I couldn't treat patients. Braver doctors than me, like Pat and like Billy, they did. They actively got in stores. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but they actively did. They wouldn't mind anyway because they're quite courageous guys. They treated and they tried to help people. They were real doctors,
They did a podcast with me recently, and where they treated patients as they saw fit at that time, and they've no regrets, and that's the important thing. Like your job is to instill confidence and trust and to treat people, and I suppose to treat people the way if you were a patient that you would want to be treated when you're going in as well, and getting the proper care and getting the proper treatment.
Absolutely. That's the reason I became a doctor, and that's because I enjoy that partnership and that relationship and being able to, it's a little bit like, I love when the plumber comes over to my house or you have an expert. I love experts. I love talking to them about their expertise. I love, when the mechanic is fixing the car, I love kind of watching what he's doing. I appreciate expertise, but as long as it's expertise that's honest, and as long as the mechanic is actually fixing my car and he's not actually, damaging it in order to get more money out of me or something, but unfortunately that's what happened with medicine.
Absolutely.
That's what's happened with medicine, that patients are being hurt now. They're being hurt by a vaccine, and that vaccine is solely for definitive pharmaceutical ends. I mean, once they got this product onto the mainstream, that where your own cells can uptake pieces of genetic material and be programmed to manufacture spike protein and release it into your body, that essentially makes every walking human being out there a pharmaceutical company, because the pharmaceutical company doesn't need a manufacturing process anymore. They just need to inject us with the gene, and our cells will make the drug or the protein for them. So this genetic product is an absolute game changer for the pharmaceutical industry, and it's sad. It's a sad day for medicine that doctors still refuse to see that, and that the regulator has been captured to the point that it's hell bent on destroying the careers of any doctors who might have an opinion to the contrary.
Do you regret speaking out?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. Yeah, there's no. I certainly have plenty of colleagues who made plenty of money and are living apparently conscience clear and have no issue, and they think I'm a monster. And I lost a lot of friends, well, supposed friends. I lost a lot of colleagues. As I said at the start, I went from hero to zero. I was elected onto the medical council because so many GP colleagues were fond of me. I'm not that I'm terribly lovable, but I'm easy to get on with, and I like to engage with people, as I did with many of my colleagues. But no, speaking out, I don't know, to be honest, this is going to sound awfully cynical. I don't know if there's much hope at the moment in speaking out. I think that these people like Harris and like the Taoiseach and all of that, I think these people are tainted, and I think that they have a certain degree of power that's reinforced by forces behind them, by corporate industries, by money, by RTE. There's an agenda at RTE, without a shadow of a doubt. There's a deeply disturbing agenda at RTE that's controlling people's thinking and people's access to news or information or reality or even debate. There's nothing more sinister or nothing more obvious than the sinister plan at the minute to label any sort of counter-government discussion as being far right and being, extremist and anti-immigrant and all of this sort of thing. So society's at an interesting place. I suppose I might be a little bit more enthusiastic speaking out now because there's more people speaking out. It was great to see so many people turn out on the streets and have a public rally in Ireland, and regardless of the issues at hand. But to see Irish people get up off their arses and actually go out on the streets and start to kind of, petition the government for change or recognize that there are serious corruptions within our government and the powers that govern us, that's refreshing. So, I don't know. It's a difficult one. I do regret speaking out because the consequences have been have been quite severe. And I don't know. I mean, am I going to be struck off? Am I going to actually lose my license? What am I going to do? I'm not. I spent so long in college. My wife often tells me I'm not capable of hammering a nail in a wall. And I think that's the case with most doctors. That we do. We spend a lot of time in books, and so what can I do if they take away my license? I don't know. I mean,
I know
kind of
that's the question. You might have to reinvent yourself.
Am I?
I always believe what's meant to be what's meant to be is meant to be. Just don't go back to college because you have a lot of qualifications there.
No,
and just a bit of a call out. If anybody's looking for anybody with those qualifications that I called out at the beginning of this podcast, anyone that wants to contact me, please do. He could lecture. There's loads of stuff he could do. So.
Well, I used to be when I was a medical student in Beaumont and in Blanchardstown. I used to work as a security guard during the night, and it was very funny because I would go in when I'd be there during the emergency department with my white coat and that. Everyone would recognize me, and then at night time I'd come in or I'd be a security guard, and nobody would recognize me when I had my security guard uniform on. I'd actually have to tell, remember me? We were working together today, and people would remember me. So I do have some prior experience in security guard work, and doing a night shift with a book, that would I'd be able for that.
Shout out for that one. Just in relation to the I'm conscious of time, so we'll give another few more minutes. But in relation to the march last Saturday, I couldn't make it myself. I was away, but there was a serious turnout, and I think some people latched on to that as an anti-immigration protest, and it wasn't really an anti-immigration protest that I could see. There was a lot of people up there who are unhappy with the way the country's being governed. That's across the board. Yes, immigration falls in there for sure. But there was also a lot of people who are deeply unhappy since 2020, since they saw what happened during COVID, during the vaccination. Like the ultimate aim, as you said, there was no supposedly treatment there, so they were able to come in with this unauthorized drug. But the ultimate aim of that was to get the COVID certs in. So we're going back to the whole control stroke totalitarian. If you would have said to anybody in January of 2020, in 2 years' time, you're going to show your personal medical information to allow you to sit indoors in this country, people would have laughed their arses off at you. Like they literally would have laughed. And yet, in a 2-year period because of the mental torture, the physical drain on people, people thought they were going to lose their jobs if they didn't get it. There was loads and loads and loads of pressure, coercion, everything. Even, kids that had never been to nightclubs been allowed to go in. That wore people down so much. 2 years is a long, long time of having your rights taken away. So it was a perfect way for them to get people to get this. To take the vaccine, to get the COVID cert, because what better way to get people to succumb to it than to do it the way they did. It was brilliant from a marketing perspective, from everything. They had the media on board, they had the medical profession on board, they had everybody on board. It was just, if you're going to plan it, this was the one to do. But my very last question to you is if another pandemic, and I'm using that in inverted commas, came, do you think people would be as quick to believe it the next time round? Do you think that more doctors would stand up next time round? And do you think maybe, less people would fall for the whole hype and the whole propaganda that went with it? What's your views on that?
I mean, ultimately, in retrospect now, I think that the pandemic was ultimately, very real in the sense that I believe there was a virus, and I believe that it did do a lot of harm to elderly people with comorbidities, people who had the flu or people who had a cold or people who were sick and had COVID in on top of that, ran the risk of serious illness. I think that's the fact. I think if there was another pandemic, I think ultimately, I think COVID was a marketing ploy, for the vaccine. The fear that was generated was hyped and was used and manipulated, and public sentiment was manipulated by corporate interests in the background. And I think RTE certainly has a big role to play in manipulating public opinion on behalf of corporate interests. And I think Ryan Tubridy and Renault and all of that kind of gave people a little bit of an inclination to what's going on, but it didn't work. People got an inclination into Ryan Tubridy and Renault and everything, and he's doing fine, and so is everybody at RTE. So I don't know if another pandemic comes. I think that this was a marketing ploy, and I think another marketing ploy will come. And I'm not too sure what form that marketing ploy will take. But ultimately, I mean, when you look at how the government operates, I think it was either Elon Musk or some controversial figure like Conor McGregor, somebody put up a post or tweet or said that the Irish government is at war with its people. And that was very unpopular for a lot of, very decent, nice people in Ireland, because how could we ever think that the government is at war with the people? But in essence, I believe the government is most certainly at war with its people. And when you look at things like the sugar tax, or you look at the kind of the carbon tax. I mean, what are these things? Only, trying to modulate behavior, trying to help people by taking money off them for yourself. I mean, how's that helping people? There's a certain manipulation going on in society that we're going to help you, but by God, we're going to screw you at the same time. There's that old saying in Ireland, don't piss on my back and tell me it's raining. But that's what the government does to Irish people. It pisses on their back and tells them it's raining. I mean, you look at the ridiculous industry of those stupid machines they have sitting outside every super value. That's to bring your bottle back, and they're charging you 25 cents. That's a big that's a profit. That's a profit industry that's essentially, it's got nothing to do with the environment. It's a form of punishment, and it punishes people and taxes them and takes their money, and it tells them that we're not pissing on your back, it's just raining, And in many respects, that's what COVID was, and that's what the vaccine was, this notion that we're helping you and everything, but they're not. They're pissing on our backs and telling us it's raining. But I don't know if, I'm hopeful that what happens in terms of that people are waking up, that the marches that we're seeing, that I'm not particularly fond of Trump's policies or whatever, but the fact that he's there shows that people are really unhappy with the same old. And we need an upheaval, a similar type of upheaval in Ireland, to expose corporate industries who are pulling the strings of government and pulling the strings of the regulator of organizations like the Medical Council. If that happens, I think if these regulators held to account, if we have a proper public inquiry into what Harris did and what the minister did during COVID and where the 50 billion of euro, if these people are brought to task, and there is a movement in Ireland certainly afoot that people are angry. People are seeing the hypocrisy and seeing the lies and are getting browned off. I hope that builds into something that does foment real upheaval in Ireland. And when I say upheaval, kick the tables over like Jesus Christ did when he went into the temple. Kick the tables over, kick them out, turn the system upside down. And it's going to cause a bit of pain and a bit of suffering, but it's gone so far that that's what it needs. And I'm hopeful. I dream that one day that might happen. But unfortunately, I think I've got to take my lynching first.
No, please God, you won't. I'm hoping you won't. Is there anything in particular? Is there anything in particular that that people say, anybody that's listening to this podcast, that they could do, or that they could, I don't know, what message do we want them to take from this? Because, I know I'm on a very similar wavelength to yourself. Now, not on everything, but that's okay. That's the way, that's democracy, and it's debate.
That makes us human.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. But is there something in particular that you would like, people, that you'd like to resonate with people, or that you want them to do, or to get behind something, or what's besides clicking your fingers and you walk away in June, what else is there out there? What do we want?
Well, I mean, the system broken and all as it is, it can't be the case that the 170 TDs in the Dáil are all fundamentally corrupt. Certainly I think a lot of them are, and a lot of them in positions of authority with the mainstream parties like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. There's a lot of corruption going on there. But, there's a lot of decent TDs, I'm sure, and I think, exercising the system might be broken, but, exercising what we have, writing to your TD, asking your TD to ask questions about why we have no COVID inquiry, why we have no compensation scheme for the vaccine injured, why RTE seems utterly unaccountable or beyond any sort of criticism for the corruption that's gone on there. Continue to ask the questions and continue to prod. I mean, my case in the Medical Council will be on June 10th if they don't kind of slither out of it and try and shift it and change it or hold it in secret. But certainly people are more, these hearings are held in open, and certainly people are more than welcome, as far as I'm concerned, to come along and hear for themselves how the regulator works and how their care or their interests are subverted in order to suit a corporate and a political agenda. People are more than welcome to come along on the 10th and be outside the Medical Council and observe what's happening. That's part of our human rights, if we still have those things, if they're still allowed, So I think keep doing what we're doing, what decent people are doing. Keep demanding answers. Keep writing to politicians. Keep getting out on the street. And keep objecting, because if we give up and we stop, then it will go nowhere. So we do have a duty to ourselves, to our country, to our families, to democracy itself, if we hold it in any value whatsoever, to demand change. So I think people are doing that, and I think they will keep doing that. And certainly they're more than welcome to come along to my hearing and do it there. There's absolutely open invitation for everyone. I'll try and bring enough flasks for tea for everyone. We're all five of us.
Exactly. No, but that's fantastic, and I would encourage people the same, to keep showing up and to keep speaking out and to keep use your voice, because if we don't speak more about what's happening and talk to people, respect that there's differences there, and there always will be. I've the same respect for anybody who chose to get the vaccine as I have for somebody who didn't choose to get it, because at the end of the day there was this enormous amount of pressure put on people. Speak to people, it doesn't matter what they chose, let them be who they are. There's a lot of people now who see the hypocrisies and the unaccountability of government, and I think that's what we do share. That's what 90% of people in this country, I believe, have a share. We share that belief in some form. So I will be keeping an eye on your court case, on your hearing. Sorry, not your court case, on your hearing, and I'm going to make it my business to be up there. And if we can keep, if you let us know, just to keep us updated. Yeah, keep us updated,
Just one point before we go. Just on something that you just said there. People do feel bad that they took the vaccine, and you're absolutely right in what you say. I have no disrespect. My wife took the vaccine. My 2 adult children took the vaccine because they were coerced into doing it. And people now are angry at themselves or disappointed in themselves because they look at statistics like 92% of doctors don't take it and didn't take it last year, our medical staff. People do feel that they did something wrong. And what I would say to people is you don't feel bad that you took the vaccine. There's somebody to blame because you were forced to take a vaccine. And that's the Irish government and the regulator. And the regulator failed people. And certainly I'll be there on June 10th. You'll be there on June 10th. And so if people want to protest about the regulator and having had to take the vaccine, come along and join us. More than welcome.
Absolutely. That would be brilliant. It was very, very, very interesting to hear everything you have to say, and you're very informative. You're very clued in. And you've a lot of courage, and I really respect that, and I really, really want to thank you for coming on with me today. Dr. Marcus de Brun, thank you very much.
Ditto. Thanks very much, Elaine. Take care.